Skip this network break, so stations should carry this, and I don't want to get fighting going on here, but I really respect your foresight and your understanding. But it's admitted now, again, we read 3 mainstream news articles yesterday, LA Times, you name it, admitting that, okay, the West did orchestrate this in Egypt, in Libya, in Syria, the State Department admits. I mean, they're doing all of this. And then I get Lennon LaRouge on for the first time ever, and I think he's got a lot of interesting ideas, and you know, is right about the Anglo-American system, and almost 90 years old, and you know, a very distinguished person. But when I brought it up to him that this was all a Western destabilization program, at the time it was admitted it was, he basically said it was a real revolution. Now, I understand that people have real reasons to be upset, and the globalists recognize that climate politically and then triggered it, but it's not debatable that they've triggered it. And off air, you were mentioning that to me. Do you have any statements about it? Well,
certainly, the thing that LaRouche was saying was that this was all genuine and spontaneous, and I think that is absolutely wrong. The grievances are real. The potential was real, just as the potential under Metternich in Europe in 1848 was real. But the detonation and then the shaping, the leadership, the program, and the general direction of these things is totally provided by the CIA, MI6, and NED. I found it was interesting when you asked LaRouche that. He immediately dodged the question. He said, the only thing I can say about it is it's all totally spontaneous, and in 1782, the King of France made a mistake. Now, the 1782 King of France made the mistake actually leads to an argument that the French Revolution was actually a destabilization of France, provoked and promoted by the British.
But it was. Let me stop you. This has all been declassified by the British. If you read mainline history, you're a doctorate of it. But the general public doesn't know that. It's on record that the South had real grievances. They had them two decades before, or 2.5 decades earlier, with Andrew Jackson. They had real tariff issues. The slavery, was never an issue. That's just a modern fiction. But the British were in there openly manipulating the South and then stationing troops in Canada, threatening to invade. That's all mainline history. This is the grand stratagem, great game.
Right. And I was actually talking about the French Revolution, not so much the American Civil War. But
no, I know, but I mentioned the French, and then I shifted gears into the yeah.
Yes, and of course the Confederate States of America was a project that was detonated and promoted by Lord Palmerston, Lord John Russell, British intelligence, and so forth. The other thing I think is interesting, looking at Bandar in particular, we have this interesting article by Martin Indyk in the Washington Post, where he basically threatens the Saudis. He says the Saudi system is very fragile, and you better remember that, Saudis. You better remember that, Bandar. We're gonna come and get you. Support for this, in a certain way, comes from unexpected quarters. Jeff Steinberg, that you recently had on your program, has been following Bandar for 2 years. Back in July of 2009, when Bandar was playing the Russian card and beginning this attempt to free Saudi Arabia from total U.S. domination, this is precisely the moment that Steinberg chose to attack Bandar for various issues about scandals and 9/11 and so forth. Really, those pretexts meaning not very much, but mainly the idea attack Bandar. And now, precisely at the time when Bandar is preparing his trip to Pakistan, which really means an opening to China, we have Steinberg again attacking him in the pages of that magazine. In this case, it's an article that says the 2 worst guys in the Middle East are Bandar and Gaddafi. Now, isn't that interesting? This coincides precisely with the 2 main people that the U.S. and the British are concerned about in the region. So that's a very, very interesting pattern that we have there. But the general idea, I think, is clear. If Bandar goes to Pakistan, this is a little bit like Nixon going to China, right? The way you go to China is sometimes through Pakistan. That's how Nixon did it 40 years ago. Maybe that's how Bandar is doing it in a certain sense. Once you're in an alliance with Pakistan, you're also then connected to Pakistan's ally, China. And I would assume that Bandar has kept up his connections to Putin and to Russia. Now, this gives us Russia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and China. Now, that's a coherent alliance. That's a step beyond the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and certainly beyond the BRICS. The BRICS that have just been meeting, that's an interesting group. But in terms of strategy, you've got the fact that India, sitting right in the middle, is essentially an ally of the U.S. against China. So they may agree economically, but strategically, I don't see how they will. If we have Russia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and China, that could become something that would be strategic and military, but it could also become monetary and economic. That is an alliance with real world-shaping potential. And again, it's much stronger than these sort of things that we've seen so far.
Now, we are seeing press reports admitting that the West is involved in all this, but that it's not going well. How do you see this ending right now?
Well, let me just, one other scenario is this guy Michael Scheuer from the CIA, of course, CIA veteran, was the bin Laden desk. I've always called him the head of the bin Laden fan club in Langley. He's on television saying that if the Saudis crack down in Bahrain and start killing Shiites, then the Iranians will invade Bahrain and essentially be at war with Saudi Arabia, and therefore the U.S. will have to intervene against Iran.
That's the Brzezinski dream of the kamikaze event, playing them off against each other.
Right, but this, you can see what he's doing. He's speaking very bluntly, but the whole idea of this is to scare Saudi Arabia back onto the plantation, right, back onto the U.S. Imperial ship. The thing in Libya that you've been mentioning, the news this morning is that British, French, and Italian advisors are going to be present on the ground in Libya with this al-Qaeda infantry, right?
But they've always been there. Now they're beefing the force up.
Right. Precisely. Now they're going to be there openly. They've been there for 6 or 7 weeks since probably the middle of February and even earlier. So this looks like mission creep. Very interesting anniversary. We just had the 50th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs, and it's exactly parallel, except that when Alan Dulles and his crackpots of the CIA invaded Cuba in April of 1961, when the first phase failed, when the irregular forces failed to get an insurrection in Cuba, Kennedy was then asked by Alan Dulles, we need air support, we need actual invasion with Marines. And Kennedy said to him, no, I'm not giving you the air support, I'm not giving you the Marines, and by the way, you're fired. That was a real president.
Well, it came out even on Frontline, that they fired him. He fired that whole group when they brought him northwards and said, let's stage terror attacks and blame it on Cuba to invade.
Right, a number of causes, but certainly within a year after the Bay of Pigs, Alan Dulles was out on his ear. Tremendous hatred in the CIA for Kennedy ever since. But what happens now, in this case, Libya's same example. You've got a secret army, in this case staffed by al-Qaeda terrorists, that you've released from Guantanamo, and they failed to overwhelm Gaddafi. So now we have the second phase. What you never saw in the Bay of Pigs, you're seeing now. You're seeing the mission creep that happens when you don't have a real president, and the CIA comes back and says, look, our secret army's not working. We need boots on the ground. We need airstrikes. We need all this stuff. And Obama's going to give them.
And they're saying if as these troops try to march in with humanitarian weapons, if Gaddafi resists in any way, then there'll be an open invasion with the Marines waiting off the coast. How do you expect that to end? I mean, they're openly saying, Gaddafi, leave now, or we're coming into Tripoli.
Well, that would be another war, and we've seen the Libyans have real guns with real bullets. You had Somalia, seemed like a very easy invasion.
He's also armed over 1 million of the citizens.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. That's the Lin Piao People's War Doctrine, and the interesting thing is you can't do that unless you are really popular. If you don't have a base, now it's largely a tribal base, but it's also a base based on economic performance. Remember, Libya was the poorest country in Africa, now it's the richest, and that happened under Gaddafi. So that's quite a record. It's not all bad.
Yeah.
There's also this great man-made river, right? The biggest.
No, definitely they want to destabilize. Webster, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, will fight our country's battles for the bankers. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.